On this episode of Athletic Training Chat, we have Mark Cole, who is the lead of AT's Cares in Wisconsin, and I got introduced to Mark at our most recent state association meeting, where he had a talk that he was supposed to give with a colleague, which he talks about, who was unable to attend. But the talk was embracing the awkward, and it was talking about asking the hard questions when it comes to mental health, and if someone is having thoughts of suicide. It was a fantastic talk, lots of really good takeaways from it, and so we asked Mark to come on and just highlight a little bit more about that. And really, he did what I thought was a great job of talking about the AT's role in mental health, because it can become a very slippery slope very quickly, and we are all out there trying to help people and do that to the best of our abilities, but that can also lead us into some areas that could potentially get a little troublesome for us in terms of overreaching or going beyond our own scope, however you see that. So a lot of good information in this one. As always, we are powered by Mueller Sports Medicine. If you are going to NATA in a couple weeks, they have a lot of things they are launching. Stop by their booth. They'll be happy to see you, happy to talk to you. Unfortunately, we won't be there this year to check it out, but hopefully the next year as things keep coming back to normal for all of us. So without further ado, please enjoy this episode with Dr. Mark Cole. All right. Well, welcome to this episode of Athletic Training Chat. We are on with Dr. Mark Cole, who is an athletic trainer in the state of Wisconsin, who heads up the AT's Cares in Wisconsin. And I got to listen to him speak at our annual meeting back in April, which is now a month ago. Wow, how time flies. But the talk was on embracing the awkward, and I was curious about it, as it was anyway, and it was around mental health, suicide awareness, how to work with that. And so such an important topic. We've been fortunate enough in places I've worked to have people that are really invested in learning about it and teaching about that. And I just thought this was a great presentation, so wanted to have him on the podcast. So here we are. But before we get into kind of in talking about all that, I wanted to turn it over to you to kind of fill in your background and how you are where you are and came to, giving that talk, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Thanks, Joel. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I'm excited to be here. So we met in April. When we were doing a workshop, again, embracing the awkward. A colleague of mine, Mary LaRue at UW Stout, and I put this together 2.5 years ago, right before the start of the pandemic.
Sure.
Because we both saw the need that behavioral health, mental health awareness, suicide awareness in particular, but sort of that whole ball of behavioral health skills and knowledge just wasn't being addressed. It's not a strength. Both she and I sort of independently felt like, this is not something that athletic trainers are super strong at. And we both have worked in athletic training curriculum programs and seen the standards and reviewed the standards when we were talking. And, the standards are a little thin when it comes to BH if you compare them to musculoskeletal or general med. And so we came up with this sort of research plan and took it to WADA, who was kind enough to fund us to get some training to take this out. And so we're coming up on a pandemic delayed year-long cycle of offering these workshops around the state of Wisconsin to athletic trainers and athletic training students to kind of build up what we think of as their psychosocial skills. And so Mary and I both kind of came to this knowledge or to this place very similarly. She and I are both of a certain age, if you will, who did undergrad and graduate school as athletics trainers and practiced in high school, college, clinic, a little pros. I did some Olympic work, lots of different settings, and both of us independently came to similar conclusions that while we felt pretty good in handling athletes from the neck down, we were not good at injuries that happened in the neck up. And that includes concussion, but concussion certainly has a whole lot of champions on its own. But it's broader than that. It's everything from, domestic difficulty or coach conflict to, anxiety over return after my surgery and those things and everything in between. And again, we're of a certain age. We didn't get that training. We both got minimal psychology training as students. So she and I independently went back to school and both ended up getting doctoral degrees in some version of sports psychology. She did it straight on mental health in athletes. I did it more on athletes and emotions, but we came together afterwards kind of around this topic because both of us wanted to improve our behavioral health skills. That's why we went back to school. But then we sort of made it our missions thereafter in jobs to make sure these skills get incorporated for students, both athletic training and any student we touch in the exercise sciences. So that's kind of where it came from.
Thank you for that summary. I guess the first question is, we've mentioned embracing the awkward a couple of times. How would you best define it? Because when I just saw it on the list, without digging into it, I was like, this could go a lot of different ways in our profession. So how would you define it, if you would?
Sure. Well, we had to have a catchy title. We had to, pull participants in. So I'm glad to hear that. And really, the title comes from, it's centered off of a simple PSA that the government put out about those awkward moments where you sense something's not right with a friend or acquaintance or what have you, and there's that pause. And you have thoughts going through your head, they have thoughts going through their head, but nothing's said. And we both really like that because as athletic trainers, we have this privilege of being close to athletes and patients and clients in one-on-one settings, and difficult subjects come up. And again, going back to, we didn't really feel like we were well trained in how to handle those. So when we came across that PSA, it kind of, the title wrote itself, and the PSA basically says that when that awkward moment happens, take the initiative to say, hey, Joel, you don't seem like your normal self. Is there something going on? A real simple, polite, hey, I care about you and you seem like you're struggling type of question that is frankly enough to get the ball rolling around someone opening up about how they're feeling or a struggle that they're having that for whatever reason they maybe haven't been willing to share or haven't shared yet. And I'm glad to be here because May is Mental Health Awareness Month, so happy Mental Health Awareness. And actually, it's also Resilient Wisconsin Month, so there's clearly a push for behavioral health and mental health awareness now.
I've had some questions, about the role of the athletic trainer in it. I think we'll kind of jump into that because I think some of the other questions might come out of it. I think I'll just start with, what do you see? And I know this is something you addressed in your talk. Obviously, everybody listening wasn't there for it, but what do you see as the AT's role in it? Now, based off of I might have a few more specific questions after that because I know that's something that, having been in a leadership position in the past, where does it start? Where does it end? You see some ATs, on social media that have different takes on it, and it can lead a lot of different ways.
Sure. Yeah. It's it's an interesting situation. Again, our background, not really getting a lot of training, and I'm pretty honest with folks. I frankly avoided psychology at all costs as an undergrad, and I just found out that I was seeing a lot more people for problems in the neck up than the neck down, and so I figured I needed to better serve my patients and clients. But the AT's role, I think, is to understand that crises, psychosocial, physical crises, those are normal. They're expected. They're, if you will, from a physical standpoint, they're job security. That's why we're there. We prefer to prevent if we could, but they happen. Ankles get twisted, knees get twisted, shoulders get dislocated. And unfortunately, there are behavioral health components where bad things happen to good people, and we can't mistakenly. I had tried to separate those. We can't separate those. We operate now in healthcare under what's called the biopsychosocial model, that our biology is connected to our psychology, which is connected to society, and our social determinants of health are supposed to account for 60+% of our healthcare outcomes. So our access to care, our ability to read, transportation, employment are big factors that, we don't really address as athletic training. We're sort of more interested in the hands-on piece. So where does the athletic trainer start and where does their role? I think we have come to the somewhat realization that it's not an avoidable role. And again, a little bit of an ageism here, but I think we're both a little bit of the age that, if you don't want to handle behavioral health, then either you need to find someone who will handle it for you, or perhaps this isn't the right field for you any longer. Because we're not just because of the pandemic, but it's such a prevalent issue amongst patients, clients, athletes at all levels. You just can't get away from it. Right. So, in the same breath, we have limits to our ability, right? We have in Wisconsin, we have, limited scope of practice. And what we don't want to do is say that athletic trainers should be doing therapy and counseling and all that. That is not the message that we want to get across. But what we want to do is we want to take the field and help them slowly walk a little closer towards being that compassionate caregiver, and who can help someone who's in crisis, and not make it a black or white situation where I either am going to do therapy or I'm not going to do anything, right? There's a lot of gray in the center there. So getting back to that, it's about taking that awkward moment and saying, getting that answer of, yes, I am struggling. So now what do you do with it, right? When I ask you that, hey, you don't seem yourself, Joel, and you say, yeah, I'm having a really hard time with my family life, or it looks like I'm not going to have a job, or, COVID's got me down and I'm really anxious about getting the disease and those things, then what? Right? I mean, being a good friend or a good professional, I got you to open up. Now what?
Mm-hmm.
And I would wager that 90% of your listeners have a really detailed emergency action plan for when a C-spine injury happens, or when a femur fracture happens, and how the ambulance gets into the facility and who meets them and all that. And I would also wager a lot of money that most of us don't have an emergency action plan for when someone's in mental health crisis, when they are, stating that they're going to take their life, or kill themselves or kill someone else, or they're really exhibiting this sort of decompensation because of the stressors in their lives, that we don't have a plan for that. And so that's kind of the niche, I think, that we're hoping that we can help athletic trainers navigate, so that they don't get caught on their heels in those types of situations. Maybe they'll never have to use that emergency action plan, right? We build those EAPs all the time, hoping we never use them.
Absolutely. So kind of two scenarios, just building off what we talked about. One, you talked in your talk, at a previous role that you had, you had found kind of the way of, if you identified something there, you were able to address it and then get to the person that they needed. And I'd love for you to talk more about just that for those people that do have those resources. And then we'll kind of come back to a lot of people, secondary school athletic trainers, small college, athletic trainers that don't have access to, those mental health professionals on campus, just some other options there. Cause I know I've found myself, as I'm sure a lot of people can relate to, where I've probably gone too far in trying to be helpful.
Right.
Not because I was pretending to be a mental health counselor, but just felt like I had to do it.
Yeah, that's tough.
And where that kind of puts the athletic trainer in a really tough position.
Yep. Yeah, no, I completely understand where you're going. And I think it is scalable for a high resource facility down to a low resource athletic trainer. We talked about a situation where I had a conversation with our athletic department, and there was a desire. It was interesting, and I think this is a pretty common experience. There's a desire from athletics to do performance enhancement psychology, which is great. It's fun. Yep. That's what I went to school for. Love doing that. Enjoy it. But that's kind of a thinly veiled conversation and a cry for help, saying that we have behavioral health problems and it's impacting our athletes' performance. And what that means then is it's not necessarily about goal setting and anxiety reduction or competition anxiety and things like that. It's that we have very anxious athletes. We have a host of depressed athletes. We have unmonitored bipolar disorder. You name it, it goes through there. And that situation happened. And so I kind of naively started building this performance psychology program, but wanted to have an outlet when these clinical concerns came up, because I knew they would come up. I just wasn't sure the frequency. So we reached out to our campus counseling center, and that's when that's when I started hearing rumblings that, hey, we have a bigger issue than we are thinking. Because our counselors on campus were like, oh, thank goodness, finally athletics is starting to realize that there are issues. And they shared both stories about volume and severity and pervasiveness of behavioral health problems within our student athletes. And so we really quickly kind of bonded with that counseling service. And I, having worked a little bit with counselors in the past, I knew that they're really vigilant about that confidentiality fencing, and they should be. That's where all your confidence is based from a patient standpoint. And so up front, I was really clear to them. I said, I don't necessarily want to know a patient's status, what you're seeing them for, unless there is a threat to themselves or to another. Frankly, you're the pros. And when I make that referral to you, I'm done. The only thing I ask, and this really showed, I think, the strength of our relationship, was I need you to help me sleep at night. So if I make that referral, I would really appreciate just knowing that that athlete showed up for their appointment. I don't need to know that they stayed. Maybe they checked in and bailed. I definitely don't need to know diagnosis, disposition, any of that stuff, unless, obviously someone is threatened to be harmed, right?
Sure.
But just that little bit, and they're like, oh, well, we can do that. Mark showed up for his appointment. Okay, great. That's all I needed. If I didn't walk them down to that health center,
right,
where I physically saw them and I knew they checked in, and then I walked away.
Yep.
And that was really helpful to me. That closed the loop on both accountability and responsibility. Because once I became aware of something, then I felt like, I had to see it through to some end point. And I think
Yep.
that's where you're getting at is, okay, when do I exit that situation? Because at some point I really need to, for my own mental health as well. So that relationship was really good. Probably one of the key points of that relationship was in talking to him and saying, okay, well, let's hypothetically have this athlete who's in crisis, has indicated a desire to kill themselves or harm someone else. How do I get them in to see you? Because they were very, very tight in appointments.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned about something called the crisis appointment. Surprise, that mental health professionals, at least in this facility, have what they call a crisis appointment. They have a counselor of the day. And they said, all you have to do is call and say, hi, this is Mark. I have someone that needs to see the counselor of the day. And if you say crisis appointment or counselor of the day, those sort of two buzz phrases, we get it. And that counselor of the day, their schedule is purposely light, so they'll drop everything when a crisis arises. And I can't tell you, I still feel relief telling that story to this day because that's so powerful. I mean, sometimes folks need to go to the emergency room, and 911 is your best option. I understand that, but I don't want to be known as the person that calls 911 every time you come in to talk to me about some sort of behavioral health piece. And so realizing that we had that system, that they had shared it with me, I had access to it, and I unfortunately had to use it fairly soon after that. It worked like a charm. And it really gave me a lot of confidence when I was talking to someone who was struggling. And I said, this is outside of my realm. I need you to talk to some professionals, some friends of mine who are really pros at this. Would you be willing to do that? And I was able to kind of, honestly make that almost sales pitch to the individuals I was working with, because I did develop a friendship with those colleagues. They were professionals at that. And so I think that was a wonderful step for us in that program. The other side of that coin is that we learned that our student athletes were averaging about 2 suicide attempts a month.
Wow.
In a small program of about 400 athletes. And so once we learned that, then sort of the focus of the program quickly changed. It went from performance psychology focus to sort of a mental health focus.
Sure.
Again, I'm not doing therapy. My colleagues who are working with me, none of us were clinicians. We were all sort of performance psychology trained. And so we had to really rely on this referral network. And so within 15 months, we were averaging between the three of us at least one referral to the crisis referral to the counseling center a month. So 3 a month. We just had a lot of mental health concerns within our student population at the time. And when I talked to the counselors about it, they assured me that, they knew it was happening. Unfortunately, they were really happy that these folks were getting help, but it also mirrored the college student population at large. If anything, it was a little bit more than college students, because as a student athlete, you have a couple more stresses than the average biology major. But I think that's a measure of success, although it definitely caught us off guard in terms of what do we think we're going to be doing, a year from now, once this program's up and rolling. I started this conversation saying I think that's scalable, because not everybody has a counseling center on campus. But I equate it back to the conversation we've all had and probably all given peers about EMS. You have to have a contact with EMS before the first football season, or the first football game, I should say. You don't want to have the meet and greet at the 50-yard line during the fourth quarter when you're playing your arch rival, right? You need to have gone in advance, maybe showed them a new helmet you guys have, brought some pads in, talked about access and keys and what roles are and all that stuff. That's pretty much ingrained in all of us, I hope. That's how we should practice. I think we need to do the exact same thing for behavioral health. Talking to your school counselor, your school guidance counselor, if you're in a secondary school, or even a middle school or elementary, oftentimes they have school counselors there who have a background working in behavioral health. And if not them, then talk to a community member who is a licensed practitioner and just introduce yourself, explain, this is the role I'm in. I'm not 100% sure how to handle these. I think, excuse me, your supervising or team physician can certainly connect you with someone. But again, they're not always, I can tell an anecdote about one of my athletic directors, but sometimes those folks in charge don't see psychology and psychosocial care as within our realm. And that's fine if they don't see that, but you're still going to see it as a patient. So you have to find a way through that. And so, reaching out to members of the community and developing that relationship, just like you have a relationship probably with an ortho, maybe a podiatrist, a couple family docs, maybe you have a women's health relationship in town. Why don't we have a counselor relationship or something? So at the very least, you can call a peer and say, hey, Judy or Dr. Smith, I had this athlete talk to me about this today, and I'm suspicious of this. How do I act? What should I say? How do I do this? They're minors, right? If you're in the high school. So they'll be really cognizant of this is a minor. Here are the legal challenges. Here's the confidentiality issues. So don't do it alone. That's, I think, the biggest piece is you cannot do it alone. And, currently the way Katie has our educational standards set up, our psychosocial skills they're pretty thin. There's really about 3.5 of the standards are dedicated to this out of, I think, 92, compared to, how many we get for gen med and musculoskeletal issues. So I think, starting with your resources, in a school district, usually there's some sort of guidance counselor. You can start there, but then also reaching out to the clinicians in the area. Or if you're part of a healthcare system,
sure.
Who's your director of behavioral health services? Start there. What do we do? What's a plan going to look like? Can you help us design this plan?
I think that's great advice, and I appreciate you kind of covering the gamut of the different things. That the previous role I was in, we were very fortunate to have a counseling and testing center on campus that had, they called it urgent care hours, very similar to you.
Yeah,
that we utilized a couple different times. But yeah, and that was all. We were fortunate compared to even people within our own conference that didn't have that type of setup. So it made our life a lot easier to get people where they needed to be.
It's fantastic.
One other kind of question I had, and it kind of tied a little bit into this, the previous example of, if the AT wanting, that's in the nature of the profession to be helpful and want to be there and do all the things. And that's also been kind of a definition of the profession is, we do so much that,
right.
You take on another thing because that especially in secondary school where might be one of two, if not the only access to some version of healthcare that people have. The idea of compassionate resilience and how to build that in, because that can be a hard thing. This is going to sound a little crass. Like I eventually found in my career how to leave work at work. And that was more when I say that the injury report or the hamstring strain that wasn't getting better and coach is frustrated, that type of stuff, but not necessarily some of these other things, which I've just seen from people sharing stories on social media and whatnot, that it's not as easy to do as it is to say. So if you could elaborate on compassionate resilience and any other thoughts around that.
Sure. So compassionate resilience comes out of a presentation that Mary and I went to put on in part by Children's Hospital and Rogers Memorial Hospital in the Milwaukee area. And Rogers had this safe person program, this WISE safe person program, which compassionate resilience was a keystone of it. And the idea behind compassionate resilience, it may even sound a little overused today because we've been through the pandemic, and probably a lot of us have been paying attention to how healthcare workers feel burned out. But this was definitely a program that was getting its foothold prior to the pandemic. That's my disclaimer, I guess. But really, compassionate resilience is this ability to give of oneself and help others. All right. So there's the compassionate piece, while preserving our own inner strength and capability or capacity to maintain health and wellness of ourselves. Right. So giving while maintaining our roots. And that's the challenge, I think. Certainly COVID and the pandemic has challenged a lot of healthcare workers. We in AT's Care had an early conversation when the pandemic hit, because social media, we were seeing just horrific accounts from healthcare workers out on the East Coast as the pandemic blossomed there. They were just, they were watching colleagues die left and right, and it was an enormous strain. And how do you balance that? How do you leave work at work? And even though this is someone's major life crisis, you step away and you go to do you, right? And that is it's a balancing act. It's not something I think I don't think it's something that we necessarily train into ourselves pretty well. We probably train the opposite, like you mentioned, the jack of all trades. Mm-hmm. Oh, I'll take care of that. I'm here for you. I got this. That's wonderful. But at some point, we have to take care of the caregiver. And so compassionate resilience comes out of that sense that you can only do so much, and you have to know when to say when. And I think that is a real challenge for athletic trainers, especially starting out, because you definitely want to make a good impression, and
right.
And you want to be there for folks. But in the same breath, you need to set boundaries. I think it's a little bit of a culture change. I think the younger generation of athletic trainers, that are the young professionals that are just coming up that I work with, I think are moving in the right direction about setting boundaries and saying no, and having some measure, more so than I ever did as a new grad, of limits that they place on things. Mm-hmm. I hope that continues, and I think it's okay if we, take a little heat for setting boundaries, because I think it's good for us in the long run. How much is too much? I think that depends on the person. Sure. I think I can point out a lot of examples of things I've seen athletic trainers do that I'm not comfortable with. Making an athlete with a suspected eating disorder, instead of going to the counselor, seeking medical attention, making sure they come in every day before practice and eat a banana in front of you. I mean, I think we've crossed a line there, right?
Sure,
when we're taking on responsibility for that person's nutrition. Clearly, when eating disorders are very complex and multifaceted, mm-hmm. Those types of things, and there's a balance also in being a confidant, right? I was working with some students yesterday, and a student, essentially asked, okay, if you have a conflict between two athletes, what's your role? And I'm like, you're there for both of them separately, right? You need to be, that's your job. And if it conflicts with your personal values, well, either maybe your values need to change or your employment setting. No one said it's an easy job. It's definitely not. But learning to say no and setting those boundaries, I think is super important. I think educating ourselves in terms of, when I look at the holistic career path and educational program that we go through, I know when I came out, I felt weak in certain areas, and my attitude, which is not everyone's, my attitude is to go at my weaknesses. Um, I rely on my strengths, but I highlight my weaknesses and then I focus on those. So if you come out and you feel like psychosocial skills are not something that you really got a lot of attention and experience with, then connect with that mental health professional or that behavioral health service lead or someone in the community. Ask to do some observation hours or talk or develop a mentorship, or come to a course, right? And we've got plenty of CEUs that we have to earn every year, right?
For sure.
I think that the second piece is that, Neil published a couple articles in 2013 and 2015 around building a mental health emergency action plan for college and secondary schools. Those are, the work's essentially done for us there. Use those, build all out of them, or build out from them, I should say. Blame it on him for building those as sort of the standard, and just say, hey, this is what the research says. I need to do this. And then he'll point you at those directions to kind of get people connected and build stuff out. And you'll learn along the way. And then ultimately, when something happens, not if, but when, share it with someone in a confidential, professional manner. But one thing that I always tell folks is you can never solve these alone. If you're unsure about something, then you probably need to bounce it off of someone, and someone else needs to know that you're dealing with this, because they're complex, they're powerful situations. And so if you are trying to grow in this area, share it with your colleagues, your classmates, your supervisor. Hey, I'm trying to get better at this, and I've got this situation that just came up, and what do you think? So, sharing those stories and concerns, and that's the best way. I was never absolutely not prepared to deal with suicide or eating disorders when I graduated with my master's. And sure enough, I had both of them in one athlete that first season. And it was tough. It was tough. And nothing prepared me for that.
Right.
And so you have to rely on your resources then. You have to connect.
Anything else around this that we haven't covered? I was just kind of going through our notes, and I feel like we kind of hit on everything, but just wanted to make sure, because this has been a great overview and highlighted everything that I kind of took away from your Embracing the Awkward talk, but thought that was important to just hear it from another AT, that there is the role, but there's limits and boundaries to that role too.
Yeah. And, I took that to heart when you kind of fed me some of that. And, I sum up our role as be prepared. Okay. Expect these crises to happen, because these crises are normal. Each one of us has been in a crisis, and each one of those crises means something different to us, right? So a crisis for a 17-year-old high school lacrosse player is going to be different than a 37-year-old marketing director, right? But every one of us deals with crises. So be prepared and expect them to happen. Rehearse your response. So that goes back to the EAP piece. Also be suspicious. If you're listening to this and you're surprised that there's a psychological component to injury or illness, then there's an element of learning that needs to happen, because we should be suspicious for the psychological component of all injuries, all illnesses, because it's very real. The brain is connected to the rest of our body. And so be suspicious of that and wary when comments maybe don't quite align with what you think. I mentioned SDOH earlier, social determinants of health. Be cognizant of those. I can tell you that I know of at least one program that does survey their athletes around SDOH and behavioral health. And I also know that program does nothing with that material. And so it's kind of like, well, don't ask it just to ask it and generate some paper, right? Ask it and get some follow-ups there. Because Otherwise, there's really no reason to ask, right? One of the key points of sort of embracing the awkward conversation or workshop is to ask the question, is everything okay? And then follow that up through the suicide gatekeeper training with asking the blunt, specific question of, are you thinking about killing yourself? Non-judgmental, but blunt. Ask the question. You can't go wrong asking the question. You can maybe ask it in better ways than others without the judgment piece, but asking that question, it was really eye-opening for me when I developed that relationship with the counselors, that's a tough question for most of us to ask. But for them, they ask it every day at every appointment. It literally rolls off their tongue. And so it will get better with practice the more you ask. And it's okay to be wrong. Someone says, no, I'm just going through a hard time. Okay, great. Glad to hear that. Move it on. So be suspicious, ask the question. If they come back yes, try to persuade them that life is worth living, and then refer to your resources. So that goes back to preparation.
Yep. Such a key point there, that preparation piece. So you're not trying to build a plan as it's actually unfolding in front of you.
Yeah. I mean, we do it so naturally with so many other things, right? Yep. I mean, your kit is stocked and you think to yourself, God, I got to restock because I used a bunch of stuff last night. You're being prepared. Same thing. Restock your psychosocial kit.
I like that. I think that could be it. That's a very implementable idea when you phrase it that way. So
there you go.
Anything else before we jump into the athletic training chat questions?
Real quick, you asked about some recommendations. How can you stock your kit? We use at my office, we use 211.org a lot. I love 211.org. It's a website, works on your phone. It literally has assistance for darn near everything. It's kind of organized around the SDOH factors, but it does mental health and crisis. It does healthcare, but it also does employment, literacy, transportation, all that other stuff. You can't go wrong with 211.org. Specific to suicide, the National Suicide Hotline, there's some cool news coming out. I hate to preempt this. We got another month and a half, but the National Suicide Hotline number is 800-273-8255. Or, believe it or not, 911 works. Everybody who works at 911 has suicide gatekeeper training. But because of the mental health crisis in the United States, there is a 3-digit number similar to 911 that is expected to go live in July for mental health crisis and suicide. I don't want to say that it's 988, but rumor is it's not quite ready yet. But
gotcha.
That's something the government's pushing that they need to have and have it be as pervasive as 911. Awesome. Otherwise, resources, folks are always looking SAMHSA, samhsa.gov, the CDC, and the Wisconsin Department of Health Services. They're awesome.
Appreciate that. We will link all of those up.
Yep. They're great
for sure, so people can see those. Ready for those athletic training chat questions?
Fire away. Yeah, here we go.
Very curious to your take on this one. Where do you see athletic training going in the next 5 to 10 years?
I had 4 thoughts on this one, depending on your venue, where you work, your area of practice. I am hopeful that we gain autonomy from collegiate coaches and have medical oversight and responsibilities. I hope we can get to the point where coaches' ability or right to hire athletic trainers and fire them is not included in their contracts. And 100%. That we're employed as a medical professional. I really hope, and I mentioned this in our workshop, that we start stocking naloxone or Narcan in our medical kits because of the opioid epidemic and our pervasive role amongst young people. I think you're going to see, and again, this is biased because of my setting, third-party reimbursement across all settings for athletic training. Payers are really looking for high value providers that can prove their outcomes. And it's getting ugly out there in terms of, what's an excessive charge, and are we seeing benefits there? And we're uniquely positioned as a field to do that. And then the last one I think will push that one home, and that's freestanding athletic training clinics. Not PT clinics, not rehab clinics, athletic training clinics. I don't necessarily care what they're called.
Sure.
But like a multidisciplinary performance enhancement center run by ATs that, you do some third-party billing, you do some cash for pay, but you think about, being able to do ortho evaluations there when you bring in an ortho, but also being able to do running evals.
Mm-hmm.
Bring a physician in for, that Saturday, Sunday bump clinic, but also being able to do nutrition counseling or strength and conditioning. Those kind of, I think, I think of them as like a multiplex for performance.
Yeah.
That would be, and having an athletic trainer run that and be able to approach it from that sports medicine umbrella concept. Oof, I think there's a place for that in the market.
I like the sound of that. What advice would you give yourself if you could go back to when you were a younger athletic trainer, and if you want to set the time frame of when you would go back and give that advice?
Ooh, wow,
coming straight out of school.
Yeah, it was 150 years ago, so it's kind of hard to remember. No, I distinctly remember a graduate student telling me as a senior, they're like, trust your instincts, Mark. Don't question yourself. And I didn't listen to them. And I wish I had. They knew me maybe better than I knew myself at the time.
Sure.
And so I would say, trust your instincts. You've been working towards this career for a long time. Don't question yourself. Go with your gut. And, you're going to make mistakes. That's okay. But go with it.
Yep. As long as you're learning from them and not just repeating them haphazardly.
It's an opportunity to learn. You're right.
I've gone through that circle of everything a few times in myself.
Yeah, it's the third one would probably be, now that you say that, thank you for prompting me, is make mistakes.
Sure.
Make mistakes. Stick your neck out. Don't be risk adverse, because if you don't make any mistakes, you're not really learning. And I think this field gets boring really fast if we stop learning.
There's a book, and I've referenced this multiple times, but I've really liked it. It's called Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke. She's a professional poker player, and she likens, you're not playing chess or checkers, you're playing checkers or poker, because chess is still a game of, you can memorize things. Poker is more representative of life. And she's like, you can make all the right calls and have the highest percentage of that bet working out. And then, it's a 95 to 5% chance of right versus wrong, and you happen to hit that 5%. Doesn't mean it's the wrong decision or a mistake. It did not work out that time. Right. As long as you're able to work yourself through that process and make the best call, it's not that you did it wrong or you were a failure. It just, in that instance, didn't work, because there's nothing that's 100%.
Right.
All the time. So that's been an eye-opening thought process for myself.
Yeah. I think that adds an element of realism. We work with the primary population for athletic trainers is a fairly young, fairly healthy group, right? Not always. And I think if we get out beyond that, we need to think about what you just said more often, because, when someone comes in with 4, 5, 8 comorbidities, the fact that you're going to be able to alleviate all their pain, or the fact that the likelihood that you're going to be able to alleviate all their pain is pretty low. Right. You need to make a difference in their lives. And that's really setting the bar considerably lower. And that's the privilege that we have as athletic trainers of working with a lot of young, healthy people that most other healthcare providers don't have.
Right. What has been the most influential resource you found in your career?
Curiosity. I'm a why guy. Why? Why? I try not to be a pain in the you know what, asking why, but I ask why a lot. Why? Why? And I've gotten pulled aside a couple times, and they're like, and I'm just curious, not judging. Why?
I like it. I think that's the first time we've had that, but that's a very good one. I enjoy that. As an AT in your role, how do you take care of yourself?
This is going to sound really, I think, probably really dumb, but regular physical activity. And I say that because I have not been great about being regularly physically active. I
Sure.
actually was more active practicing as an athletic trainer day in and day out than when I really moved into academics. And I was never a really lean person at all. And I didn't, because I was active as an AT, I didn't necessarily have to do and
Sure.
chose not to do a lot of extra physical activity. Frankly, I just wanted to get away from the gym by the time work was over. And now for a number of years, have been very sedentary, and I hate it. I hate it with a passion. It's one of the reasons I loved being AT was because I got to go outside, I got to hang out, I got to demo exercises and challenge myself periodically. And so I've sort of seen the light, if you will. And it's a little bit better that I'm not around a gym. I'm not around a fitness center. I'm not around to workout stuff. And so it's a luxury for me now where it just used to be a regular thing. So
Sure.
focusing on that and finding something that's fun. I recently, in like my photo shows, it's my kayak from last fall.
Nice.
Doing fun stuff like that. I'm just dying to get out on the water, but I'm a little chicken, still a little cold here. So
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah.
so,
53 on May 25th is
yeah,
not
in rain.
exactly, yeah, not exactly the spring we're talking about here. If you could change or eliminate one thing, could be a modality, a common practice, or a mindset, or something of your choosing in the field of athletic training, what would it be?
I would really like to eliminate the tension between professions. I think not just AT and pick another one, but between all others. I've seen battles between pharmacy and family practice and ortho and nursing and physicians and you name it. There's always some sort of, it seems like, rivalry or turf war, and it's an energy suck. It's absolutely a bucket emptying experience to be involved in that. And I just that's probably my top dislike about the field is like, oh, I just want to dodge those things. Ugh.
I agree with you there. There's plenty to go around in terms of people to care for.
Yep. Oh yeah. There's no shortage of patience.
Yes. Final question. What does being an athletic trainer mean to you?
It means caring for others.
I like it. Simple.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, anything else you want to share? And I had a little blurb that I want to make sure that we got in.
Yeah, I would, love the opportunity for a little shameless plug for AT's Care.
Absolutely.
It's a NATA sponsored peer-to-peer critical incident stress management program, and that's a lot of words. That means ATs taking care of other ATs.
Yep.
It's not therapy. It can happen anytime because crisis is individual. I mean, if I get a car accident, that could be my crisis and I need some help, but it's someone who's been in through, if you will, 2-a-days in August or stand out in the rain in April, and understands what it means to be an athletic trainer who has some extra training and some skills to help another athletic trainer. We're always looking for more volunteers. There's a state chair. I'm the state chair for Wisconsin, but there's a state chair and a district chair for all our states and districts. So if you're interested, please reach out. And we don't get a ton of call outs, but we definitely want to be there to help our peers. And we'll train you for free. So it's all volunteer. Won't cost you anything. So we'd love to have more volunteers.
Awesome. Appreciate that. And we did a previous episode a while ago with Brittany Oven. I can't, sorry, who out of Nevada, I believe, about AT's Care. So we'll link that at
Awesome.
the bottom of this
Oh,
episode as
yeah.
well, just so people can
Go,
kind of hear a
That's
couple
great.
of different perspectives on that. So
That's
last one, if people wanted to reach out to you or follow you, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, sure. So my Twitter is at Hike in Woodwork, and it's where I'd rather be hiking and doing woodworking. And my email is mcole001@gmail. I'm not super tech involved, but I definitely follow those two.
Perfect. Well, thank you for taking the time.
I appreciate it.
This was a great, for me, even as just an adjunct to the Embracing the Awkward Talk, just to get a little bit more background on it, and it provides such a great overview of the athletic trainer's role in mental health. So I really appreciate it.
No problem. Happy to help. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you again for checking out this episode of Athletic Training Chat. We hope you enjoyed it, took a lot from it. We were really excited to talk to Dr. Mark Cole on this, and just it's such a always timely topic. But we again appreciate you for taking the time to listen. We are powered by Mueller Sports Medicine. We have our Throw a Lifeline program with them. We just got our second one filled and are looking to get that out here soon as all the supplies come in. The program is to help get emergency equipment to athletic trainers that just don't have the budget for whatever reason to get it, and help them care for the patients that they take care of. And so if that's something you'd be interested in helping out with, any amount of donation would be welcome. Check it out at athletictrainingchat.com/throw-a-lifeline or clinicallypress.com/throw-a-lifeline. 100% of donations go directly to funding it. As soon as we hit our goal, we get it sent out, and Mueller provides the kit for it to all go in. So thank you again to them. Thanks again for listening.